it was entertainment. That's what I'll say. All right, so that's my sign to get myself moving here. Now that we're recording officially. So thank you all so much for coming back. Really excited that we've got a full house again tonight, or this morning if you're on the other coast. We do have, like Susan said, we didn't frighten everybody off from yesterday. We had some really great conversation, lots of good notes and so on, and some really good PowerPoints to be able to get out to everybody at the end of this session. So yesterday, in case there was anybody that wasn't with us yesterday, we looked at the issue of the issues surrounding, models, whether it's blended learning, online learning, and issues like school buildings, with connectivity, internet access, use of resource, allocation of resources, and so on. Today, we're going to get into some of the other highlights, some of the other topics, such as staffing, learning center models, policies, board decisions, things like that. So all of these, remember, we are hitting the highlights, and every single one of the 8 topics is actually something that we can dig into and offer another 2 hours or whatever kind of workshop. So the speakers have agreed that they will do all the next round. So rather than listen to me any further, I think I'm kicking it off. Is Bryan on with us?
I think it is 5
no?
next.
Okay.
I don't see Bryan.
Yeah, so David, is that you? You're up next?
Yeah, I'm 5. Yeah, I think.
Oh, great. All right. So
I hope.
Thank you.
I hope
Awesome.
that's what I prepared for.
Yes, you are. You absolutely are. All right. So Dr. David Reed is no stranger to NCPSA. Thank you so much. I know you work extensively with AI and with some of the other organizations. So it's all yours, David. Thank you. And we'll use the same format as yesterday. We will do about 30 minutes on the topics and have Q&A. I'll open up the chat room. And so if you have questions as you go, please do put those into the chat room. And then, you can open up mics and stuff and ask the questions directly. The more we interact and the more questions we get, the more we'll know what kind of trainings to bring forward. We want this to be a year of lots of resources, lots of training to help you help this school. So David, thank you.
Thank you, Trina. Again, the basic context of what I was asked to cover was kind of the back end and front end of a distance learning program. I've had the experience of doing several startups, blended and remote, and currently working on another startup in Connecticut. So this is just based mostly from my experience of what I've learned over the years of doing this. So, and let me know if the slides view okay for everybody and they can see them okay. The back end, and that's kind of how I look at things, and Trina and I have talked about there's kind of a back end and a front end. And I've always said, as far as instruction, which is my primary experience, is I kind of take the baton from the back end when that kid is enrolled, and then I take it, move forward with the instruction part of it once they're active. This piece would be all the pieces behind the scenes of what's going on. And again, this isn't even conclusive, because we all know from different experiences and different types of schools, there's many other pieces, plus different state policies and rules are going to create other pieces to these type of setups. Your administration is going to depend on the size of school. I've done everything from a school with a dean of students, where they're the teacher and in charge of the school, to a principal. So it really depends on the type and size of your school as to what that position looks like. Probably one of the most important pieces is your registrar, because the registrar position is your transcript analysis person, and that is critical. And I've spent years analyzing transcripts with registrars, because you can get some very interesting documents from all over the world when it comes to transcripts. And no matter, even after 25 years, I see some that I have to actually research the grading system in the country they come from. because I have no idea how much credit to even give the student. They would also do grad plans and grad clearances. You know, and the important piece that supports the registrars, your enrollment specialists, they're the ones that are getting those records from the previous schools. And for those that have ever been involved in records management and requisition from other schools, it can be an arduous, frustrating process. And it's a nonstop process until you get everything you need to get that student moved to enrollment. Two other pieces that do not go away in virtual, remote, or blended, or any type of program is your student support services and student activities. But again, these two pieces will look much different depending on the type of school. And not only the type of school, but the grade level of the school. You need somebody to manage the LMS and the SIS, and somebody for IT. And this varies by LMS and integration. As I think was mentioned yesterday, depending on what you use, the amount of management will be very different. If it's Canvas, if it's Edgenuity, if it's Edmentum, Blackboard, all those pieces are going to look a lot different to whoever's managing those two pieces. In addition to managing the LMS, it'll also, the amount of work for this person will also vary based on the amount of integration between the SIS and the LMS. Because the more integration you have between those two pieces, the less redundancy you have. You can work basically from either one as a teacher or administrator or registrar. Obviously, if you're in a private school, charter school, in most cases, you're going to need business development and marketing, which develops your website and develops your marketing plan. Because if you're here in Arizona, like I am here in Maricopa County, we have 350 charter schools in this county alone. So it is highly competitive here for students, highly competitive. You need your HR, obviously, you need financial management. If you're getting public funds, you need your state reporting person that knows how to use the SIS and report your attendance or time to the state for funding. And then last is accountability management, particularly for public schools who are getting those letter grades like we do here in Arizona, because that letter grade is also goes right back to your marketing.
David, let me stop you right there, if you don't mind. Again, starting to get some questions coming into me on the chat system.
Absolutely.
Question on, many of our private schools or faith-based schools do take those vouchers. And,
Right.
I know most of them in Florida do as well, actually, and many of the Catholic schools do. So use of the vouchers, are there requirements in place or perhaps just to kind of to mention it, that when evaluating, when accreditors are out evaluating, you really have to begin to look at evaluating best use and make sure that there are good protocols. In Florida, it's actually mandatory to have a third-party audit, I suppose is the word.
Yes, it is
you
here
need
too.
an audit, so when you're coming out to do the accreditations, you're going to want to make sure you have access to those documents as well, not just the school budget, because those audits are required and there are fiduciary responsibilities connected with accepting any of those vouchers, those scholarship funds, tuition scholarships, and so on. And then the other question is, and I know we have in January, we've got a top marketer coming in to do a physical workshop with all of the leaders, but really looking at the area of business development and marketing for recruiting and understanding ethics and best practices and so on for that. I'm not sure if anyone has been looking at those things, but as an evaluator, someone that's coming out to not only analyze what's going on in the schools, but to support the schools, it's no longer enough to do the, go stick the for sale signs out around the building. No. Those old marketing things are not going to be effective, right, in this modern age of digital transformation. So you're really looking at allocation of resources, staffing, and money on a high level, on a high end. Yes. If you get into some of these things that David's talking about. So just keeping that in the back of your head, that you're looking for a shift in a normal school budget. You're looking for items where there's allocation of resources above and beyond what you would have allocated or you would see I'm going to say that in most private schools, a marketing budget is less than $10,000, right? And a traditional brick and mortar. But if you're going to roll out an online school, you're talking significantly more for supporting recruiting services, enrollment services, marketing, public relations, and so on. So just don't be shocked by those. All right, apologies. Off you go. I hope I answered those questions. Okay.
Yes, my previous program, we grew to over 2,000 active students and international, national, and it was an extensive investment that was made to get that done. And as Trina says, that's a whole nother, that's a whole nother 2 hours easy of training and how you develop that, because it's all different based on location. The front end, well, that's pretty easy. It's instruction. We know that. As I said, this is primarily my background. I've set up all these, but usually this is my part that I take over the instruction part of it. And that's, as I said, when that student, they hand the baton off from admissions to enrollment. This is when the group or the pieces that go into place. You need all your basic teachers for your different areas. And I don't know how it's going in other states, but here in Arizona, the whole highly qualified certification requirements have all become just absolutely blurry, very blurry right now. So what I feel is having certified teachers, highly qualified in their areas for schools, particularly private and charter, it's a marketing tool. It's a piece that you say, we have a quality school because we have this type of people in our classrooms, and these are their credentials. That would be the only reason I would want to stay with that type of staff. Teacher types. Most of the programs I've started with contract adjuncts. You start, I'd have like a lead, instructional lead that were paid employees, but then recruit colleagues of mine from schools to be adjunct contractors, teachers as I grew. And then once we got it to a certain point, then we began to bring on full-time instructional leads in all areas, etc. So that's another piece that has to be decided. How are you going to set up your teacher employees or independent contractors? You'll need tutors, obviously, and the tutors primarily, what I have found is primarily in the math area. That's where the biggest need usually is in the math area, always. Particularly if you're dealing with students in an alternative program where you're getting students, which is my background for 25 years, is dealing with students who are traditionally behind or are just totally disconnected from school. So the tutor is very important. They're versed in being able to do an excellent session through Zoom or whatever medium they are using to be able to help students online. Depending on your status, exceptional student services with special education. Got to have somebody to do the paperwork, reevaluations. Anybody that's been around special education knows that is a very convoluted and high liability area, very high liability area. And unfortunately, you got to know have somebody who knows what they're doing, because many times, again, if you're dealing with certain types of students, you're going to get documents that are old, expired, etc. And you're going to have to redo everything because previous schools just didn't keep it up, or the student's been out long enough that their documents have expired. You're going to need special ed teachers, which should be cross-categorical SPED, paraprofessionals to tutor. And then you're going to need contracted services, your psychologists and speech, etc., for different pieces of the IEP that are required.
David, I'm going to interrupt here as well, and just put a note or put a mention. Those of you that are thinking through this as David's presenting, one of the big issues is, I think Bryan and Roger talked yesterday about technology resource selection and capacity building for the tech itself. When you get into, and I think Bryan will talk more about the curriculum choices and so on today, and curriculum standards. But one of the things that's really important here is when we get into the area of special needs students in an online world, in the brick and mortar, you can assign a human being to shadow that person, support that person, and so on. in the virtual world, it becomes extremely complex and litigious
Very,
in
very.
that all of your resources need to meet standards of accessibility. So, you know, that's a high-end question when selecting resources as well, is always being cognizant of the fact, you know, do you offer these services to all children? And I would actually recommend that in looking at the list of special needs children or all the things, you're very careful about saying which services you actually offer online, because if you say, yes, we take special needs kids, then you're open to everything. And, you know, I've done it 20 years, like David and many of the rest of us, you just can't, you know, it's just not possible, because you cannot meet the needs of very heavy IEPs with some of these students. So just be aware that as you are out evaluating and assessing schools, that you provide the support necessary for the schools in understanding who are they supporting, who are they serving when they're building and launching their online schools, right? So you want to make sure that your schools don't say, you know, I'm not Statue of Liberty, bring me your all, right? So your school, your online school, needs to be focused or targeted towards a particular audience, and that audience, you know, it's not that you're saying in any way you're discriminating against, it's that we are unable to deliver those services in an online environment. We recommend XYZ. So be very clear in what you are targeting or providing, because it opens up all kinds of technology needs and so on. All righty. Sorry, David, go ahead.
That's
Thank you.
That's all right. Yes, and that also includes, as we know, students that slip through the cracks that have never been identified. And so as soon as you get them, you enroll them, they're yours. They're now yours. And I've had that happen many times. All right, student services. Okay, again, varies by grade level and type of school. And these are some of the things that I've done and set up for distance learning programs. Virtual field trips. I've set up on-site field trips in locations where I had concentrations of students. We created virtual clubs. I ran college and career readiness for my last program. And at that point, you would bring in guest speakers, community partners, post-secondary, and then develop post-secondary options and have them speak as well to your students. Then in addition to that, extended credit earning opportunities. And this is primarily for high school. And this is where you would have dual credit, reverse credit, school to work credit, service learning credit, local public vocational programs. So all these pieces need to be focused on, and then the connections made, and then somehow communicated to your students and parents that these are available to you. And from my experience, the biggest biggest advantage of creating this type of program in your school is for those students that are behind or credit deficient. These are ways to catch them up, because they can earn a lot of credits outside of the seat time through these type of programs, while they're focusing on their core credits during the seat time while they're online. This is just the tip of the iceberg of the different things that could be created for student services.
Yeah, thanks, David. And one of the things I think that I remembered a great phrase, Bryan, I think Bryan has joined us. Well, he used a great phrase, and it was yesterday. He said, social and mobile, you know, 2 requirements for online services today. And I think when you start getting into student services, career readiness, building community, virtual clubs, virtual field trips, real field trips, all of these services need to be both social, and you're socializing concepts and groups and so on, and also the portability. But you're also talking about these things are heavy with parent involvement.
Yes.
And so, you know, you've also got your flags up here on, are they engaging the whole community? Bryan, if you're on, do you want to engage with this conversation? Or I think I saw Bryan come in, right?
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Oh, thanks, Bryan.
Yeah, some of what we shared yesterday was that you've got to start small, kind of think big and learn fast. And I think one of the things that today's parent, student, staff member expects is some sort of frequency and regularity, right? So if you have a way to communicate via email or a constant contact or a MailChimp, just like a great website, don't leave it unattended to. Like, make sure that if your cadence is once every 2 weeks, then that's your transparent cadence. If you're going to go social, there's all kinds of tools today that are simple and free to schedule your tweets or your celebrations or your recognition of folks. And that all has a way of building online and digital presence and community. And then I think the last piece is mobily. We're in an interesting space, right? Where political figures text us daily. We get these weird sort of contrived messages that we sometimes didn't ask for, or we need to filter out. So I think it's important for educators to be the leaders in that space and to kind of say, whether you're using something like Alert Now or whether you're using something like Remind 101, establish some norms, establish some ways that parents and staff members and others expect communication. Those who follow me know that I send out a Friday finale every week. I don't send it out on Tuesday or Thursday, and I don't, send it out 3 times in a row or overhit people. So I think you have to be very intentional, would be my counsel, Trina. And the second, don't overwhelm people and give them a chance to filter and, access things when they need it.
Thank you. Thanks so much. David?
And to piggyback off that a little bit, I even recommend possibly, just like you would in a school, even creating an activities calendar. Create your activities calendar so that it's scheduled and reviewed regularly and updated, so that parents and have access to all your stakeholders should have access to that, just like they do your school calendar. Student support. This is a lot of what I dealt with in my last program, because we dealt with a lot of different students that were definitely in need. And so basic needs was one. We even hired a community support person just to handle basic needs for our students, in building those resources. Tuition support if you're private. And I know doing accreditation for a lot of private schools, that's one of the questions that comes up is, like, during COVID, when people lost their jobs, did people have to leave the school because they couldn't pay? And these are questions that I would ask as an accreditor is, how did you help those people, or did you? Do you have to provide internet? Do the kids have internet? Do they have hardware, or do you have to provide it? Because these two policies here vary by state. There are a lot of states that require it. We do not here in Arizona. It's not a requirement. My last program did have a loaner program, though, that we did for students that came with internet and data that we would use and issue our students. Tech support obviously is very big. And then mentoring, counseling, tutoring, again, learning support labs possibly. So I work with another school that's totally statewide virtual, and they've got 10 to 12 learning support labs throughout Arizona, where the students can go to if they physically need help, or if they want something, or talk to somebody, or even just need to work on their courses because they don't have access. And then the community resources and partners, testing centers. So let's say, for instance, if you're publicly funded and you got to do the standardized test, that becomes a logistical nightmare, believe me, because I've done statewide testing for standardized tests. And you have to do it on site, and it has to be proctored and the whole bit. And so it was almost like triage, and everybody was on duty for testing. And we went all over the state of Arizona to test these kids and get that done. Internet access points. So we get students calling in, I can't work, whatever. We would have people research the area they were in and come up with internet access points for those students, so that then we could refer them out quickly to the library, to the Boys and Girls Club, whatever it was, so they could keep working. And then tutoring support. Let's say if the parent may be affluent enough to be able to pay for tutoring, so we would even look for places where they could access this tutoring reasonably. And this,
David,
the
David,
student
I'm
support
going
just
to-
grows and grows too, as you grow your program. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Trina.
I'm actually going to say that this is a really great reminder that as you are helping schools, if they're going to not just blended learning on that time, once they determine the kind of Steve Haessler, because he's had some great successes and also is going to share with us some of the negatives, right? So some of these points, such as the tech support, right? Well, if you're running an international school, your tech support is going to need to be, and your teaching support and your tutoring support is actually going to need to be in extended hours. So the 8 to 3 job or the 9 to 4, whatever it is, you're going to need to look at allocation of resources around the clock, or at least over a 12-hour period, to meet the needs of being able to offer appropriate educational support. So very often schools go into it and they think they're using their teachers in their time zone, and that's not enough. So so it can get really hairy, and we want to look at those. This again is another whole conversation on staffing models, like Dave had started at the beginning, but understanding that full-time online schools are actually running a brick and mortar school plus. So it's more work, it's more resources, and it's more effort. Great when they get going, but it is not an easy thing just to throw out there. So, with Bryan's advice of start small and build up, just understanding what the end line is, or the end goal, what's your resources to support all of these other things. So again, as you're encouraging, supporting, and developing your teams and your schools and whatever your schools are doing, just know that this is not going to traditional brick and mortar schedule. David, go ahead, sorry. And I'm not sure how far down you are on the slide deck. We've got fairly tight agenda, and I know I keep interrupting you with questions.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll bust through. Onboarding, basically, I recommend an electronic application. I also recommend creating auto replies for all the actions that happen to a student, whether it's the application, whether it's enrolled in a new course. Any action with the student should have some type of an auto response that not only goes to the student and the parent, but any stakeholder that needs to know that action happened. There should be contact after the application is submitted, an initial orientation, basically just a quick call that says this is what's going to happen now and what we need. A program orientation once the student is in and up. And one of the things that I think is missed often is the orientation for the program also needs to be for the parent and the guardian. In other words, the parent and guardian needs to understand the LMS and what that student's doing. Because they're blind many times and they think the student's working and they're not doing anything. Records requested collection, which I said, which can be an arduous process, and the records that are required to enroll a student vary by school, vary by state. It's all different. And then you get into McKinsey-Vento, which is no records. You got to enroll the kid. So there's all kinds of different pieces here. Then once you have the credit, all your records, then the graduation path plan is created. Okay, what courses does this kid need to take and in what order? That should be reviewed with the parent and guardian so that they know, so they know what's going on. You've got those extended credit options that are offered to students should be reviewed with the student at that time. And then you go into enrollment and their first course, right, or courses. And then it is recommended here, my little call out, checklist. So as these pieces are filled, have a place to document a checklist that these pieces are being done. Guidance and counseling is pretty self-explanatory. It really doesn't change much other than it's virtual again. You're doing things remotely. And so they're the one that develops that graduation path plan. They verify that the credit check is complete. In other words, they check the registrar's work, reviews the credit check, and the graduation path plan with the student and parent guardian. And then they monitor the progress, performance, and participation, what I called the big threes progress, performance, and participation. And they help monitor that along with the teacher and any other stakeholder to make sure that student is progressing and active. Records, again, vary by state, vary by the status of the student. The transcript should be official, and you want to get transcripts from all previously attended high schools, all of them. And the reason is because I couldn't tell you how many times I got credits from a school that did not get transferred to the next school. They missed it. And so getting all those transcripts is critical. Expect issues, closed schools, calendar breaks. Here in the summer with small schools, try getting records. Very, very difficult. And then we have charter schools that close. That becomes a whole nother process. And last, under records, know the requirements. And this is just a brief, the requirements here in the state of Arizona. Within 5 days, they're supposed to request it. And within 10 days, they're supposed to get them back. That's really, and it's written specifically in statute. Does that work? No, not at all. But again, but
well,
that's
David, sorry, but on this, many schools, especially in the private school market, they have finance policies. So you've got issues of children who haven't paid their tuition, and they try to bail out on the private school, and they want to join the virtual school or whatever to keep going throughout, and then they'll start another brick and mortar on time in the middle of the year or whatever. So there are all those issues. The issues don't go away because you're going virtual. So just, to be aware of these and to know that as you're evaluating, the kids and their families are dealing with thinking that virtual is different, or virtual is easier, or virtual is all of these other, descriptors, and really they're not.
Here's an example, just an example of a records request, one that I've used in previous schools and that we've used, just an example. Pretty standard. Do you get all these things? No. Sometimes you have to ask 2 or 3 times, unfortunately, or they come in a fax all pieced together, which is also fun to deal with. Data. And when it comes to schools, as much as you can collect, I believe as much as you can collect. The amount will depend on the state and type of school. Demographic data, obviously, academic benchmark data over the school year, over multiple school years, surveys, staff. Basically, all these pieces are heavy in the accreditation world. This is one of the big pieces we look at when we're doing accreditation. And we look, and one of the things I learned is you could have an electronic application that's tied to the SIS, and then that it can auto-populate most of the data into the SIS. That saves you a lot of time right there. Then it's more of a verification process, not an entry process. And last but not least, I was asked to do the path. Basically, this is how I see the path: application, records collection, the credit check, develop the path plan, courses to be assigned, extended credit earnings, so you know what path they're going to take, and then an expected graduation date, enrollment, follow the GPP, completion of requirements to graduate. Let me go back to the GPP real quick. And one of the reasons for the GPP is if I'm doing a remote program and it's, say, a 0 calendar where we're going year round, that GPP is in the SIS. If I get a text from a kid saying, hey, I finished my class, can I get a new one? I know what to give them next. So that's one of the reasons to have a document that says, okay, where are they at? Where are they going? So we can keep those kids moving along in their schoolwork if they're that motivated to keep doing it. They complete the requirements to graduate. There's a final graduation check by the registrar, issued the diploma and final official transcript, and then most importantly, post-grad follow-up. Start what happened to the kid once they left you.
And David, would you do me a favor, go back to that page? One of the things I want to plant again in your thoughts is graduation plans, or GPPs as Dave's calling them. These graduation plans will vary. So depending on the model for the school. So for example, if you're doing a traditional semester by semester online school program, if your scheduling is is by cohort with an official start and official end, then you've time to set things in play and you will follow a year by year process. But if you are doing an open entry, open exit kind of virtual school where you're not with a cohort, then it's a whole different set of schedules. So you've seen some of those with the, with the schedules from like credit recovery programs or with summer school program where they start, I enroll, and as soon as I apply, I start the following Monday or whatever it is. But these are things to look for: is what kind of a schedule am I on? Is my online school following my traditional school if I'm associated with a brick and mortar, or is it something that is year round? And if it's year round, is it open entry, open exit, or is it assigned to a particular semester? And if so, are they doing 2 semesters a year, or are they doing 3? Are they doing 4? Because we can fit all those things in. So really looking at understanding the complexities of scheduling and just making sure that the teams, can articulate those to you, because you can get really lost in kids not being able to finish work or kids moving from one system to another. And it's really, really important as evaluators that you at least are aware to ask the questions about those kinds of things, or to help schools understand the design. And back to Bryan's point of keeping it simple, keeping it small to begin, unless they're already out there and moving and know exactly what they're doing.
And just to clarify too, in my last program, we had 3 different type of grad plans. We had the original grad plan, we had a revised grad plan. So if there were any changes, we would create a revised grad plan. And then if the students separated and then returned to us, we had a re-enrollment grad plan. So we tracked all those steps. And then we were required to do it for the year. And then in July of each year, the beginning of the school year, we had to create all new grad plans for the next school year, for the next fiscal year.
Thank you so much, David.
This is my information.
Oh,
this is my information. Go ahead. If anybody has questions, but again, I feel free to reach out also.
Feel free to put the questions into the chat. We're capturing those, and then we will follow up with all of the presenters. But Dave, thank you so much. I'm going to roll over to who had session 6. Is that Steve?
Steve. Yes.
Steve. All right. Steve, are you ready, or do you want me to get Bryan to fill in? He took over for session 2 yesterday.
Bryan, if let me take a crack at it, and we'll see if a couple of issues. Can you let me share, Trina, so I can upload the PowerPoint?
Yeah, that's Clay.
Clay, okay.
Okay, it's taken care of, Stephen.
Thank you. All right. So are you able to see?
Yes.
A PowerPoint? Yes. Okay, good. So we'll just start here, move this around. Well, thanks everyone. My name is Steve Haessler. I'm the president of Catholic Schools Teaching and Learning for Global Ed. Shortly before that, I was principal of an online Catholic school headquartered in Brooklyn, New York. I live in Longmont, Colorado. So it's if someone told me that at the beginning of my teaching career that I was going to end up running a school in Brooklyn from the Rocky Mountains, I would have said, what? So it's a new set of experiences. Education is new and fresh and very challenging. I really want to thank Dave and Bryan and Trina for the information that they shared just a moment ago. And one of the words that I heard that sort of resonated with some of the experiences that I've had recently in online education is the word pieces. And I thought, wow, it really is. Let me just give a little background, then we'll go into a couple of puzzles that I invite you to sort of think through with and maybe pose some others. So as much interaction and Q&A and feedback right away is going to be the goal here. but I was involved in founding and launching what's called the Jesuit Virtual Learning Academy back in 2008 or 9, or right around when Disrupting Class, you may know that book, came out, and people were wondering about online, and is it the wave of the future, and so on. And so a colleague and I, headquartered in Omaha, Nebraska, launched this. Basically what it was a supplemental service, course services. Some of the Jesuit schools had, there are about 60 in North America, and some of them had students that would just blow through their math curriculum and need something, something else, and that would be 1 or 2 students. Well, what JVLA, or Jesuit Virtual Learning Academy, now it's changed its name to Arupe Virtual Learning Institute, but back then JVLA could piece together 1 or 2 students from around the country and make a viable class and pay, have enough in terms of course fees to finance a teacher. And that model worked really well. It wasn't a full-blown school. There was talk over the years of making it turn into a school, but eventually, the decision was made not to be a full-fledged school. I left there a couple of years ago to take a principalship of a school, the online school, St. Thomas Aquinas, headquartered in Brooklyn. And that was a K-8 school. I've spent most of my academic career in secondary and high school. And so this was new territory. And what David went through, I kept thinking, man, if I had that slide at the beginning, when things were getting underway and we were launching and having all of this, it was like trying to drink out of a fire hose. Everything was coming. I remember hours and hours of IEP reports, just taking one piece of that puzzle. Those were extremely time consuming, and we had to make sure that in the online context, we could meet the requirements and so on, or as Trina mentioned, or we might not be able to, and we had to communicate that to parents and guidance counselors and so on. So very challenging to set up an online school, especially under those trying circumstances of the pandemic about two and a half years ago. It was really challenging. And the other piece of the puzzle is in a mission-driven school, and my background is in economics, and when economists look at what they call, awkwardly enough, a education production function, which is the outputs and then what are the key factors or key inputs that result in quality outputs, like successful citizens and future earnings and all those kinds of outcomes that economists look at. One of the things that surfaces in that area of research in education is that mission-driven schools really seem to have an edge. If there's a clear sense of mission and it's articulated not only in hiring and in communicating. Bryan, I love the thing that you mentioned earlier about the cadence of communication. That was so important. I did Monday morning message. You did a Friday finale or so, but maybe bookending those would be a good way to do that. But in any case, how do you think about opening up an online or a hybrid program with the mission in the forefront of your thinking? So let me just go through some of these puzzles with you, and we can consider them. So the first one is about staffing, and we were talking a little bit about what the research says in terms of hiring for mission. And I wonder, here's a puzzle: is it better to hire for a particular position, or that should be, or apologize for that, or for the organization? In other words, there's a tension between filling that teacher's spot and, let's say you have an array of candidates, which we did 2 years ago, and we were looking through them and pouring through resumes and trying to infer what might or might not be in those documents. It was really challenging. Do we want to hire for, we needed, let's say, elementary math, fourth grade math teacher. Should that concern of filling that slot dominate, or is it better to look for a candidate who might be, need some coaching or developing in this area because they are so gung-ho about the mission of our school? Let me pause and just invite you to respond to that or react to that if there's any thoughts one way or the other about that. Do you hire for a position? Do you fill that slot, or do you want to go for broader categories? What do you think?
Sorry, make sure you unmute.
This is Bryan. I'm going to say this carefully because I want to totally support that a full-time FTE who is rightly job described, who is rightly positioned and rightly compensated is always my preference in leading an organization. And often resources don't provide us every opportunity to be as deep as we would like. So at Setzer Group, and I'm advising lots of other virtual schools on this right now, you need to have a talent cloud strategy. You need to have a talent cloud where you know who your core FTEs are, you know who your core contractors are, and when possible, your core strategic partners. Because a lot of times a partner can make you mightier than your weight class if they're doing something very specific for you. For instance, outsourcing your finance or outsourcing your own tech support might be better with a partner than with a contracted position or a paid FTE position. So I think it's always this dance. I love your question here about what's another staffing puzzle. No matter what the role is or the job to be done in Christensen's language, is it FTE, is it contractor or partner? Those are the three questions I always ask.
Awesome. Thanks, Bryan, for that. Anyone else on the tension on that puzzle? How would you approach it, or what would drive that?
Steve, this is Larry.
Hi, Larry.
I think that there's I think both of those are important. If you have a teacher that doesn't know fourth grade math but is mission directed, you're in trouble. If you have a teacher that is a world-class fourth grade teacher but is anti-mission to the school that you're operating, then you're in trouble.
Yeah.
So, and many of the organizations here are mission driven, religious or some kind of proprietary school. And so unless you have teachers, administrators, volunteers that are mission driven, then you can destroy your mission with one employee or one volunteer and be in real trouble.
Very good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Larry. Trina, any thoughts?
No, I'm trying to allow other people to really engage well.
Okay.
Just so as you know, a comment came in there with from Edward that said Larry is describing his position really, really well. The schools need to be both mission driven and teaching capable. And it's, here I am saying I didn't want to engage constantly, right? But I mean, this is a topic near and dear to all of us, because we've all been in mission-based work and mission-focused work, and launching CatholicVirtual.com in the same way that Larry did, his school for his faith-based schools globally. They have to be aligned with the mission. Otherwise, you've got saboteurs on board, right? But they also, people come to your school because it's got the highest of academic expectations. And so it is a fine line. So I love that phrase, Edward, that says teaching capable as well as being mission driven. So I want to make sure we get through all of our guest speakers and all of the topics.
Okay.
And Bryan has 2 to go because he was covering a content one for me as well. So I'm cognizant of time, and I think I got too much into David's, although David, like every slide was so rich and we had so much there that we could dive in on each one of those topics. So just keep going, Steve. Thank you.
Okay. All right, puzzle number 2, scheduling. How can we schedule regular spontaneity? What I mean by that is in St. Thomas, we wondered what the schedule would be. St. Thomas was an online option for Catholic families and other families, non-Catholic families in Brooklyn who did not want in-person learning. Many of the schools, in fact, the schools were closed for a while. So we had designed a program for about 100 families and we ended up with 2,500 families. So, you know, speaking of drinking out of a fire hose, it was coming at us fast and furious. But the issue of scheduling, the tool that we used is a Google Classroom for setting up courses and subjects and enrolling students and so on. We also used, after the first iteration of the distance learning program, when we became an academy, the Brooklyn Diocese has an academy model there, and they wanted an online academy, and so families wanted that, even as the pandemic and the lockdowns and so on were mitigating and tapering. Some families, for a variety of reasons, preferred online education. They found that their son or daughter thrived under online learning or distance learning, and they wanted to continue with that. So that was the reason for the decision to make a go of it as an academy. But the puzzle of the schedule was really difficult. And what we ended up doing, we listened to parents. One of the things that my predecessor encouraged is to talk with parents. And so we had lots of parent meetings, little Zoom chats and so on. What schedule would you like? What last year did you prefer? What do you want to avoid? And so on. And the parent input was really, really valuable. And what we came up with was kind of interesting. In K4 context, we had a kind of a departmental approach to scheduling, where we had the students would move from subject to subject and they would have different teachers, as opposed to the more standard model where you would have the same teacher teach all the subjects. And that really worked well. There were some things that worked not at all in the St. Thomas Aquinas context, but that decision, again, based on parent input, was really helpful. And the students, I think, and Trina, I'm mindful of the time here. I've got like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Is that going to be okay? All right,
Yeah,
we won't
it
get to
is.
all these
Yeah,
puzzles.
5 minutes is good. And I will say to everybody, you know, Stephen and I are completely different and opposite on, he went really deep getting parent input and creating schedules and really, really meeting the needs of the community. And I'm going to tell you, I said absolutely not. So, you know, you get what you get kind of thing, right? Because it was a crisis, and, you know, by the time you take all that time to really understand and to do things, you know, you end up trying to please everybody. And so be mindful of my 50 cents worth here, Steve, is, you know, you went to one extreme, I'm probably on the other. So you have to be really, really mindful of what resources do I have? What is the target? What are my goals? You can't be everything to everybody. You know, financially, how are you going to do it? How are you going to staff it? So just understand getting feedback, understanding why you're getting the feedback, I think is important. You know, how much flexibility do you really have? Because the worst thing that could happen is you gather all this input, you get all this feedback, and then you can't deliver, right? So set your boundaries and be really cognizant of, as you're helping people in your organizations. And to be fair, I don't expect any of you to be helping your schools set up online schools or programs, right? That's what the panel's for. That's what all of these people who have years and decades of experience launching online programs, that's what we're here for, right? I don't expect any of you to, but just to be aware of the questions and all the minefields. So Steve, 5 minutes and then we'll wrap up. Thanks.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. I don't think there's that much daylight between us because the boundaries that we had with the parent input were the, Schedule A or Schedule B. So we did have a drawing board. We had a couple of iterations, and then the parent feedback was really helpful. But you're right. I mean, you're certainly right. You can't go in there and say, what kind of schedule would you like? So we had version A and version B, and that's what the departmental approach
Right.
was one. Let's take one more. Support programs. What is, and the puzzle is, and here's some recovering econ teacher speak for you. Is curriculum a substitute or a complementary good? A substitute is an instead of good. You could buy a Tesla or a Ford. And a complementary good is a go together, like a biscotti and a cappuccino. Those are usually bought in tandem.
Love one right now. Yeah.
Yeah. So the program, what support program makes sense is a very key part of setting up the school. We looked at many STREAM programs. I don't know if you've heard STEM programs and so on, but it was new to the term STREAM programs, which is religion and art programs. And in the resource list, there are a number of STREAM programs, a Catholic interdisciplinary approach to learning, put out by Sadlier. There's the National Science Foundation. There's all kinds of rich resources online, much of it free. But a support program like a STREAM or something can really be useful and important for what I would consider the holy grail of online learning, which is engagement. We call it student engagement. I think a dear friend, Paul Zach, refers to it. He doesn't like the word engagement. He uses immersion. And what Paul Zach is a neuroeconomist. He's investigated brain chemistry and raised some very, very interesting questions about what works in the classroom. And we are pursuing engagement. We know that learner engagement matters a great deal. And so that's why support programs can be so vital in a successful school enterprise. But what works is a very, very important puzzle and a very important question. And why does it work? In working with Paul Zach over the years, we had, just to end with this story, I thought some of the stuff that I was doing online in my courses, I taught AP Micro and Macro and statistics for many, many years in person and then online. And I thought some of the lessons that I had come up with over time were great. And, students seemed interested and so on. And then we attached some of these monitors that Paul actually measures brain chemistry with some of his work. And it was surprising to see that the student level of what he calls immersion was low and where I thought it would be high, and very high where I thought it would be very low. So we're still sort of in the early phases of understanding in a deep, deep level what works in the online context, especially with regard to with engagement, what we call engagement, or what Paul calls immersion. But just circle around and finish with this thought. I think the curriculum of a good school, a mission-driven school, is a complementary good. It goes very, very well, especially with that stream, or maybe within the increasingly popular classical model, the trivium in the Catholic tradition. So it matters a great deal how that's integrated in the existing system. And it's a puzzle to be worked on. So I'm going to stop right there and thank you for your time, and thanks. Turn it back over to Trina.
No, thank you. Thanks so much. Just checking, did anybody have any more questions or anything for Steve? Obviously, you know, his expertise, he has launched a number of not just local or, you know, in New York, that's an archdiocesan program, but also globally with Jesuit Virtual or Rupe Virtual. So all of them mission-based. So again, if you need expertise or you want help, you know, Steve is available for us, and we will do some deep dives with your heads of school and with your with the IT people. Steve, I think you gave us a really good segue over into looking at content and curriculum and standards and so on. Bryan, I'm going to ask you, is that a good time for you to pick up for us?
It is. Happy to do it.
All right, thanks. Thank you.
Okay, can everybody see my deck for today? All right. Good to be back with everyone. I'm gonna share some, 10 minutes of commentary, and then we can dive into any kind of Q&A that you may have. I think in general, whenever somebody asks me, what the standard is or what the standards are, you want to be surrounding yourself with, best in class thinking, and you want it to be informed in ways that if anybody were to review, if an accreditor were to come and kick the tires, or, an expert externally were to come in, that you've done the crosswalking, you've done the mapping, you've done the anchoring, and you're bulletproof, right? Like you are working towards what best in class looks like in that industry. And so what I thought might be useful for an agenda is to talk about what that means to us at Setzer Group whenever we're asked to review a course, or we're asked to go on a study visit, or we're asked to look virtually into online pedagogy. What would we be looking for in terms of best is the standard? And then, similar to yesterday, I'm going to give you some candy store examples of, once we know that, how do we put it into practice? And then I'll leave some time for Q&A. So for the folks that didn't get to join us yesterday, I only reorient you into what we are often asked to do with standards. Somebody will say, can you give us 30 days of advice on how we get started? And what kind of standards should we be looking at? And we do that, and it's helpful to folks. Some folks will say, Bryan, we've got 4 or 5 competing standards conversations going on right now. We don't know what's best. We don't know how to build towards a model that makes sense, and we will design that for them. And then other people want those standards inspected, or they want them done with fidelity. While I have been a part of many accrediting visits in my life, I'm more in favor of what I would call Jiffy Lube visits every 90 days to make sure that you are actually doing what you said you were going to do. And I don't think those have to be week long. I think they can be virtual or, 1 to 2 day visits. But the point is, when you talk about transformation, the cadence term comes up again. You want to see where people are, and are they getting better, and are you inspecting what you would expect? So what does best in class mean? Well, one of the first things that I like to do with any group I work with is say, what has best in class been? Who are the giants we're standing on the shoulders of that would work in the face-to-face blended digital? So for me, I always look to people like John Hattie with Visible Learning in Australia. I always look to Robert Marzano in the US, or Wiggins and Teague, or Dylan William. And those 4 giants in the sort of standards to assessment of or assessment for learning progression, there's a lot of what they do in every online class. There are pieces of it. There are comprehensive natures to it. So when you look at what they do in the face-to-face, what has happened over I'd say, Trina, since 2007, is various groups have gotten together. Quality Matters, Global Ed, who's represented, of course, today, Aurora Institute, which used to be INACOL, EDUCAUSE, NSQ, and ISTE. And back to Stephen's comment about pieces, you could crosswalk all of these folks and you would see some common pillars, and then you would see some nuance. And what's so exciting about the work that Global Ed is doing is they're really starting to nail down that fidelity and say, well, you know, how do you know something is in a quality tier? And so they've done some great crosswalking with NSQ, for example, but they're also influenced by, you know, Trina's time in the business and the industry since, you know, the early 2000s of when this became a thing. But many people that are aligning standards need a place to start, and they need to be thinking about that when they design even the first iterations of a course. So what we often do is we pick something like understanding by design. And I'm a big divine rule of three guy. There's a reason that pastors speak in threes. There's a reason that it's all over Da Vinci's work. It's very empirically valid that people kind of remember that way. So if you take something like setting goals or learning intentions or communicating an orientation to the work, back on that slide where all the standards are, you're going to find that as meeting a standard, that when you begin work on how you're going to communicate what is to be learned or answer the question of what is it you want people to know and be able to do, that is good practice, whether you're in online, blended, or face-to-face. And then you want some way to determine what's acceptable as evidence of that. Now, this is where online historically has had challenges. Pre-Common Core, most of online was procedure. And then after online Common Core, it became conceptual-based learning or application-based learning. Later on, we would talk about things like neuroscience. But assessment is always based on the level of rigor and cognitive demand. When you look at what you want, how will you know that learners are getting to your standard? What evidence will be acceptable? Those are things to look for in a physical course or an online course. And then finally, when you're planning the learning experience, I can't say this enough. At scale, from 220 to now, people experienced emergency remote learning. Many people have not experienced quality online learning at all. And so they don't like emergency remote learning because the people that designed it were not seeking to create a learning experience. They were seeking to stay out of the newspaper or to make sure that learning loss was covered. They weren't intentional about what they wanted to do. So we'll go into a client like Louisiana, which I shared yesterday, and they first had us review their practice with online learning now. They were they would say this if they were on the call, they were one of those emergency remote learning folks. And so they wanted to, build skills and knowledge for their instructors. And they wanted people to be leveled, a beginning online instructor, and an intermediate instructor, and an elevated instructor. And then they were playing based on the learning from COVID. They knew that asynchronous and synchronous didn't need to be separated, but brought together. So they wanted to start thinking about how they could integrate new tools or platforms. I showed you some of the class platform yesterday when we talked. And then now we'll move into the spring with them, talking about how they apply that into practice. In higher ed, they use terms like active learning, and we use terms in K-12 like blended learning. So all of that being said, there's a lot of motion around hybrid learning in general, and applying these standards falls out like in a short overview like what you're looking at now. So on this slide in particular, that standard of starting out by providing context and objectives, making sure that differentiated learning levels is a standard you're aspiring to, and that you also can help people self-assess and look at their own level of competency so that you can begin where you truly are. I think a great 90-minute instructional unit online begins with an assessment of how to begin and meeting the standards across all those previous slides of where you enter the discussion. Now, number two, when we talk to them, we want them to understand that there are universal principles of effective instruction, and that how they think about pedagogy, andragogy. In this instance, we are both teaching students in the Louisiana Community College system, and we're also training the adults. So we want them to be able to leverage async and sync, and we want to do best practice like checking for understanding. So a lot of this notion around being able to collaborate, being able to use standards where you're thinking about, real-time assessment, or making sure that learners have some sort of cognitive demand on their exercises. We want to do that with a digital-first mindset. And what we mean by digital-first mindset is, let's not take the boring notes that are bad in the face-to-face practice and create a situation online where we're just replicating poor practice in person. What we want to do is follow models like Samer and others where we're augmenting that experience. There's a big difference between taking notes on a Google Doc and collaborating with the 18 people on this call around different roles on a Google Doc. One of them is a higher standard around collaboration. So as we move into things like digital learning design and tactics, we actually want to engage where students blur the line. They start to understand how to leverage asynchronous practice and synchronous practice. So I don't want to make any assumptions there, but async often means you're not live with an instructor in that moment. Sync often means you are. But let me say this, if you believe that learning, as I do, is both personal and social, you need times to reflect and times to have standards around processing with others. One of the great practices of the National Council of Mathematics is leverage students as resources for each other. And how you meet that standard when you think about working in offline environments, in dyads, in groups, all of this stuff can be well planned and well thought out. And then finally, are you assessing that learning? Are you having an exit ticket or an ability to meta process some of the big concepts and do sort of formative assessments along the way? Do students have optionality around what they're learning? So many of the standards provide for flexibility and creativity where students are assessed on a competency-based progression, not because they didn't complete a module or they didn't show evidence at that time. If you believe in things like productive struggle, students haven't just learned it yet. It's not a finality around the grading or assessment. They're on a progression to learn it. So what we tend to do is break these things down into pieces where we'll use short EDUCAUSE intro videos. We follow things like accessibility on those videos. I mentioned the work at Gallaudet yesterday around closed captioning, or following it up with a digital transcript. We want to be explicit about what students will learn, and we want to have 3 different experiences. Now, let me pause there for a second. I know that it was a bit of a fire hose yesterday, and I'm not trying to say, go off now and build in 3 different modalities for every online course. I'm just telling you what Louisiana's doing, where they were real clear on we're going to have learners and teachers and professors coming from different angles. So they wanted us to model for them, think about the start small, a 90-minute module to do that. So if you made one of your goals to just design a 90-minute module on what effective standards progression looks like towards instruction, that's a win. And then you can talk about that module in your PLCs or your communities of practice. You can have instructors bring evidence around that module. This doesn't have to be building out some big ecology. So as we think about that, you know, you can see on a few of these others, some of the examples of what we were talking about in a deeper way. And similar to yesterday with Trina, I'll send this deck to you so you can think about it in your own context. But we talk a lot about, you know, having them ask questions around how do universal principles translate from online, from offline instruction. I think that's one of the objections we get, right? Like Susan yesterday said, is this quality, or what can I bring over? That's a great activity to do a Jamboard around, like what stays the same when you come over as an instructor related to the standards and what changes. And I think when you have frequent checks for understanding, you now have some classifications for those levels. People are either starting to get this or they're not. So you can actually demonstrate with them. Remember yesterday when I was talking about class, which is in the second window here, we've embedded little practicums in this course where they can experience quality synchronous instruction. They can observe it and process around it. And then through the leveled exit tickets, we have a sense of where people are and how to follow up. So while this looks really crisp and looks like something that took a long time to build, it's really about getting started. We have 10 more modules to build behind this for Louisiana. This is just the orientation model and the level of thought and rigor that goes into it so that we have a good foundational understanding of common language in practice. We understand what standards we're looking for when we're evaluating those instructors, and we have a good handle on how those standards show up in the activities. I think as a final, consider incentivizing folks to show what they can do with the standard. If you want to see a particular standard in practice and you want to have evidence that they've gone through an introductory model to show you what it is, that's a great way to give them a badge that they're now a standards ninja, or they've accomplished 7 or 8 things that you would want them to know and be able to do before they progress on. So what we've done is all.
Bryan, let me stop right here, because you're just unloading so many thoughts and so much really great information from an accreditor perspective. When, I mean, I think a couple of slides back, you had just the, the mindset slide where you're just saying, just getting a digital transformation or a digital mindset. So many people working in schools today, digital first mindset, yet so many people today about online schools or online learning, they will check the box and say, yes, we have these things. Why? Because in their mind, digital learning or online learning or hybrid learning means I've got one-to-one computing, I've got some online resources, and I stuck things in Google Classroom. And guess what? We were successful during, we were more successful than our public school counterparts, but they don't know what they don't know. And so I think that even having these kinds of conversations is just so critical for people to understand the nuances and the impacts of everything, because you can't just take what you've done in a brick and mortar and layer it into a platform and say, okay, now I'm online. It is a completely different, there are some skills, yes, and our ultimate goal is educating and student learning, but there's so much to that digital first mindset that I just think that bears a lot of thought in your conversations as accreditors when you go to work with schools and you go to work with these heads of school, really making sure that they're understanding, like helping people to know what they don't know is as important as checking a box. Yes, they've got a technology resource and so on. So I'd love some feedback, before Bryan moves all the way through here. Where are you in these conversations? Have people, demonstrated this? Have they talked about what they're doing? I know we got some good feedback yesterday at the end of the day, but Bryan wasn't here for some of that. So, and any Susan or anybody else who's involved with the schools, what, Edward, what are we hearing from our schools? Even Larry, I know that you're still working, supporting schools as well. So, what are we getting? What feedback are we getting from schools? Where are they in this conversation? I don't want to call from the back of the class again,
I would have to say my group of schools are eclectic. They're very different. I've got some schools who are moving to putting their whole high schools online, even having developed a university and having that actually meeting standards. And then I've got other people that don't really want to even engage in online learning. They want it brick and mortar. And then we've got people that have a hybrid program where they do some of both. I don't think there's a digital first mindset. I don't think we understand that.
And I would say that's, for me, I think that starts at the state level. I don't see that from the top down, policies and procedures that are being administered to schools to prepare and to implement these programs. It just becomes more of a funding issue, or as you just said, Susan, it becomes a choice issue based on the administration or the theme of the school or the feeling of the school as to whether we want to do this or not, or even invest the time. And from my experience dealing with schools over the last year, your districts basically have reverted back to pre-COVID procedures and policies. That's what I've seen. And
well, and I think one of the
go ahead.
things we talked about, oh, sorry, no, I'm so sorry.
Well, yeah, what I was going to say is that they even make it, unfortunately, I've done many online school applications here in the state, and they have made it extremely difficult to even qualify and even participate. And I think a big part of that is it's just not really supported at that level.
Well, and so one of the things I was going to say was yesterday we heard, and I'm not sure who it was from, and I apologize, but yesterday we were talking about how our schools need to stay relevant for what's happening in the outside world. And so begin to embrace some of these as essential skills. We're not teaching using the tools that our kids will need to know how to use when they get to college, and they're not, and same thing in the workforce, So if we're not embracing this digital first mindset in the school building, I think we're doing a great disservice. I'm going to read, Edward's still not able to speak, but he says, many of our schools are outsourcing distance education resources to meet their needs. He does have a school that under the digital models work to advance it, but most of the schools are actually, they don't want to do it themselves for digital education at the K-12 level. So I think the same as you, Susan, we've got kids that, we've got schools that desire one thing or the other, but it's not a digital first mindset where we realize the world is going digital, the workforce is digital, the colleges are going digital, and what are we doing if we don't prepare the students for that by having that mindset? The kids are going to leave us behind, right? And the families, back to Bryan's parents expect everything on their phone now, right? So
I think Trina, that we had such an adverse reaction to going online during COVID.
Yeah.
I mean, as a grandmother, I even sat with my granddaughter doing her online stuff from a public school, and we were both bored out of our minds, and a lot of it was the lack of connectivity or whatever. It was just the most frustrating experience that people didn't want to do that again. And yet we have situations where we really need to be able to provide a digital process. And I understand we're coming into a different world, or we're already in a different world.
We are, yeah.
And man, I think we've got such great content, but
Yeah.
lousy delivery. I just
No,
think
but
most
you know
of
what,
my
Susan?
schools, most of my schools are real heavy on content. They really are. But how to pass that on?
Yeah, no, and your dilemma is all of our dilemma, right? So everybody's in the same thing. There's no such thing as perfection at this point. No one has it right. Even those who have been in online learning for a long time are now having to really analyze and shift models and understand, are people actually learning from what we're doing? Are we just throwing it into an online platform? So, Bryan, I know we're down now to 30 minutes completely to take us through to the end. And I want to give everybody a chance to at least post a question or two on the chat. And David, thanks for responding. Outsourcing is quite common, but I think one of the things we have to realize then is, and I'll circle back to something Stephen also experienced in running online schools, or go back to the idea of being mission-based, right? So, and tuition-based. When you outsource as a private school, there comes a point when the parents come back around to you and they say, well, why am I paying you tuition then? If I can get that for free using the public school uses that same provider, or the charter school uses that same provider. So, Susan, part of the magic sauce of your schools is actually the knowledge, the content, the methodologies, and the experience, and so on. And it is a very fine line between outsourcing all the way down to the content. So we struggle as tuition-based programs in finding that layer that says, I'm adding value to what you're getting. So it's not the same as a public school experience, and really understanding that, nuancing that, because when times get tough, parents who are determining, do I spend my 30,000 on tuition, or do I spend it on something else? There's lots of questions and lots of things to be addressed. So, Bryan, I'm going to throw it back to you. Let's say, I don't know if we can do 15 minutes, and then we can wrap up with everybody with final questions.
Yeah, I think I can do 5 and pick up the questions a little bit.
Okay.
Let's take something super simple like DocuSign or Adobe Sign. How many processes in our schools and those we oversee can be automated, and for what purpose, right? So we are often in a private school, a charter school, a public school, filling out the same forms over and over again, providing the same signatures over and over again, when we already have solutions at a very simple level that allow us to really like automation. Recently, Trina knows this, I've begun part-time coaching again in soccer, and someone sent me a note that said I needed to go on to their HR platform called Bamboo, and it would take me maybe 10 minutes. And I thought, I've never been on an HR platform that takes 10 minutes. And I was very hesitant whether I was even going to part-time coach, because the experience has been so miserable with Frontline and Applitrack and all these crap systems that were created 25 years ago. Lo and behold, Bamboo HR took me 10 minutes. It had a PDF that downloaded my LinkedIn profile. It had ready-made signature blocks. And I thought every HR person in schools in America ought to be fired for not knowing about this tool. That's how, right? And it could automate that experience. So I make those 2 comments to say that, like, what Susan is talking about with poor pedagogy, poor timing, poor delivery, poor design, to bore the tears out of somebody that, wants to be there and be reconnected with their classmates or be reconnected with their teachers. think about a design that my kids took during COVID where an invention camp that was here in the Triangle that used to be face-to-face decided that they would send a box kit to our homes every day. So on Monday, we opened up a box kit, like a box of surprises, and it said, hey, jump on at 9 o'clock. We're going to have a 30-minute daily stand-up. And all we did was jump on at 30 minutes. They oriented us to the invention tools, and then they let the kids go for 4 hours on their own. Parents helped, they were engaged. And at the end of the day, they came back to celebrate and recognize on a 30-minute daily stand-up what had happened. And I thought every school district ought to see that, right? Because they're hacking how this should be done. So one of the things I want to leave you with in this session, and happy to take any feedback and questions like we did yesterday, is this is a sample project plan for how we're thinking about working with Louisiana, but I would say that it works for all of you. You've all had this experience in COVID now, and you've probably got a pretty good idea of what you don't like and would like, and maybe want to expose people to in 90 minutes about how private school or private accreditors are going to look at great online pedagogy or great online outreach. Knowledge and skill building is something to look for. Did these schools make any changes? One of the saddest things I observed during COVID was my kids were immediately placed on Canvas and Google, and Canvas and Google are powerful tools. And if I said, how optimized were those tools from February 28th to May of COVID, I would say that the teachers had low level of cognitive demand, low level of design. They probably optimized those tools about 10%, okay? So I thought, surely they're going to spend the summer making this better. And they didn't. They re-entered the fall with the same practices. Now kids were rebelling in droves. They were figuring out how to work around, etc. So with this design on the project plan, what we're doing is really helping Louisiana think about what they want to do better in Module 1. And we're workshopping that with students. They're on our design teams. They're the ones giving us feedback, okay? Then we're going to go into, we think we've figured out a great new synchronous tool that will make this better for you that you haven't seen. And let's experience it, right? And let's experience what quality online learning can look like. And then finally, let's come up with ideas together, how to make this better in your own context. If you look at that timeline and you left these meetings and said, Bryan, I think January, February, March, we're going to do a dive into what worked during COVID. We're going to talk about what we would like to improve. Then we're going to have people kind of differentiate. By summer, they're going to learn some training. And then by fall, we're really going to start working on these best in breed examples together. That's a way to start, because all of the teachers, parents, and students who experience this have a lot of questions, a lot of things they would like to improve. When you think about Canvas's mobile app, Blackboard's mobile app, Desire to Learn's mobile app, why in the world were school districts, private schools, and charter schools not posting a daily or a weekly suggestion box on Friday or Monday to say, what's going well? What can we improve about your experience? That would have been such a much better approach than trying to figure it out as adults and not talk to the people who were actually experiencing it. So I'm going to pause there, Trina. I'll do like I did yesterday and bring the full deck up and take any questions we have before we get to the final short session.
I think most of the questions have been popping up in here. One of the, I'm seeing a couple here in the chat that raise the issue of outsourcing and finding those partners. The big one Dr. Petrie pulled up is that most of those outsourced groups who are content providers and so on, who are providing credit, are not actually accredited by these accreditors or by, and so on. And so it raises not only an issue of, I had said, who's paying and the parents getting involved, but for this group, for these accreditors, when your schools outsource part of the actual learning, what are your policies? And I love that phrase. Who are acceptable vendors? How do we determine that, right? And who are the pretenders? Because a lot of it is garbage as well. And, a lot of it would not meet your requirements as the accreditor. So, how do you, what percentage, for example, of your, what percentage of a school day can be online learning before it actually is identified as an online, as an online learning program? Is it a separate school for you? If I'm a student in a brick and mortar, but I'm taking 5 classes online, I'm attending the brick and mortar, am I actually attending a different school? So those are all the kinds of questions that really are, that they raise an ugly head right here, because you can't wing it in certain things.
Yeah. And it makes me think, Trina knows that I was the founder at North Carolina Virtual, second largest state virtual school in the country. And on October 26th, they just got recognition from Quality Matters, because they've been on a 5-year expose to make sure that all of their courses are Quality Matters certified, right? So one way that you can answer that question is, when we go back to the slide I was referencing, can you all see this, or did it stop sharing? When you go back to this slide, is there any evidence that the people you're visiting or accrediting have had any interaction with standards work? Is there any evidence that their online courses are either validated, certified? Have they had metrics in their strategic plan, like how many of their teachers are Quality Matters certified? Is there any evidence that they've done any student work with ISTE? So great programs begin to think about who's out there that can make us better, and how do we align that in what you're looking for? And so when it gets to vendors, my comment would be, it was not a cost benefit game for vendors to take all of their curriculum pre-Common Core and automatically upsurge it to be Common Core-ish, or, think about it in terms of conceptual based understanding or application based understanding. What was in their best interest was to stay procedural and wrap a teacher around it in blended or hybrid, who would bring that extra quality to it. So when people ask me the question, who's the best? I go, in what context? And they go, well, we have this canned curriculum from, Ed Minim, or we have this canned curriculum from Connections Academy. Is it any good? Well, tell me about the Holy Trinity. And they're like, what's the Holy Trinity? I'm like, does it have a person involved next to it, like a facilitator or a teacher? Does it have any kind of assessment or data strategy to it, where people are looking at it in PLCs? So my comment would be, what's quality in digital printouts? What's quality in handouts? We have to make sure that we've got it surrounded with a curriculum, instruction, and assessment strategy that is quality. So they can use it for dual credit, they can use it for credit recovery, but how is that making its way back into the overall strategy for what they're learning? And I'll give you a great example. Math. For years, people have thought the best way to learn math is give you double the problems and hope you do well that night, right? You didn't learn the first 10 problems, but I'm gonna give you 40 more of what you don't understand. I hope you get it, right? But what we know about empirical math practice is students have to talk about math. They have to productively struggle through it. They have to complete assessments that show where they are. But yet teacher after teacher, not even in the online environment, puts out a sink or swim mentality of they either know it or they don't. So if I'm an accreditor, I'm like, forget online instruction, your pedagogy is whacked. Like, you don't even understand best practice in teaching and learning. So when we try to make that happen in online, what I really wanted to leave you with on this lesson is, I can't say enough about this class tool that's in the second column. What they did was, and you can Google them at Class LLC, they brought the instructor over to the left. They brought the 3 most predominant student views over to the right. They're tracking metadata. They've embedded in Zoom live windows, live breakouts, so you don't have to leave them. They've organized the way in which you interact with the tool. And so all I would say is it's not just about low-level engagement. They've also been looking at how the students are working with the tools inside of it and how they do demonstrations, how they have formative assessment through their various checks in the product. I'm bullish on it because I think one of the things they've been doing is listening to students. And so sometimes we can make tool selections that are already a part of what we do. If we're already on Zoom and we don't think it's very good, then let's look at some of the versions ahead of it to give people an experience that's engaging, that's interactive, and has data behind it. So I'll pause there for any Q&A before I show you some last minute things.
Well, I think, Bryan, I'd like to address the what Edward just brought up, and he talks about percentage of online classes and other issues that as accreditors, to be addressed. And he also raises the fact of dual enrollment. And I know many of the students are actually taking their college dual enrollment as an online class as well, because, the number of college classes in most of our community colleges and our universities has actually, grown tenfold because people can take those online as well now. So Edward, you give the example of a situation locally where a student left a private school, went to the brick and mortar charter school, 35 miles from the house. She's a senior taking dual enrollment in 5 courses and doesn't even set foot on the campus, but will get that high school diploma. And I will tell you, as both a head of school and, in multiple roles over the years and as a mother, I've had my kids in private school all their life, and they all did this. My 2 youngest kids are now 22 and 24. Both girls received their associate's degree the week or 2 before they received their high school diploma. They received their bachelor's at 19, and then they went on and have done their master's by the time they were 21, 22. They were out, right? And at 22, one's in her PhD program at NYU. She's the baby and is working, teaching freshman psych at NYU and working in a lab at Columbia and so on. So for kids who are really accelerated, this is a great conversation because it brings me to the point of saying, when you have gifted and talented kids or you have accelerated children, I didn't share that to brag, but to say that very often our schools are not keeping up with what good curriculum is and what student learning is. We're not personalizing the education experience, and going to school from 8 to 4 every day, sitting in the classroom just didn't work for my own kids. And, I still paid my tuition to the private school, and it's an Episcopal school. The Episcopal school that both the girls graduated from, they graduated, they went to school. The only thing they had to show up on campus for was the religious instruction program, and that was 2 days a week. So, I think, as shocking as that will sound to you, we had whole schools of it. Everybody was doing it. All the kids were taking, all the advanced kids, and they dropped the advanced placement courses and they dropped the IB courses. Why? Because the kids taking those programs rarely got the whole diploma, and then they had to argue with or debate or present their case when they got to university or college for the college credit if they earned a 4 or a 5 in the exams and so on, and there was pressure on for a single exam. When they do the dual enrollment programs, they're earning credits as they go because of common course code numberings. It's automatically on their college transcript. And so they're accelerating their whole, their whole academic career. So we can say psychologically putting young children on college campuses at 16, 15 or whatever. But at the end of the day, the kids who want that fast track, that want that plan, and the state of Florida actually has an accelerated diploma of 18 credits and out. So, there's all kinds of nuances. And as we get further and further into personalizing education, I think we're going to see more of those. And to your point, as an accreditor, you know, how open are you to those, and how responsive are you going to be to really, you know, some of these issues that are very, very actively being pursued right now by schools and by organizations. And I think if we're not, my only caveat will be, if we're not as private schools, then the charters and the publics and the others will take a percentage of that population. So, Larry?
Yeah, I have a lot of comments, but too many times I think schools, particularly small schools, jump into distance education as a survival technique rather than a digital first technique. And we as accreditors have to have meetings like this that we can gain the knowledge that we need, so that when we go and evaluate a school, that we can see that they are not digital first. They're really a brick and mortar school wrapped in a set of ones and zeros. They really don't understand how to actually teach online. And so I really appreciate what Bryan and David have brought forth, because we as accreditors are the ones that need to hold the schools accountable for realistic growth in the distance education arena, and not allow them to bore students to death with menial work. And so I really think that we have to revision this as an accreditor, not just from the school level. And so, you know, we as accreditors must have the knowledge and the vocabulary and the background, so that we can help schools to grow and not allow them to just because, you know, I've had schools that said, well, we're going to become a digital learning school because we think it's profitable. Well, I haven't seen too many yet that have found that, you know, they can have one teacher and 50 students rather than one teacher and 10 students and make a profit that way. They usually end up losing their school over it. So I just put that in, that too many. Another stakeholder that we have to engage are school boards, because if we don't engage school boards, then they're the ones that make the decisions many times on what they're going to do, or they get an administrator that sells them a bill of goods, and they go down this path without any knowledge. So Bryan, thank you, and David, thank you for what you've brought forth.
So Trina, you're welcome, Larry. Trina, a couple of things that I know we may get to the other session in a later workshop, but I don't want to lose this thread, because I think it's important. So when I said procedural early, that most face-to-face curriculums were teaching procedure until Common Core, that's also code in my book for teaching skills, very specific skills. But when you move to conceptual or application-based learning, you start to get into knowledge, dispositions, how people, you know, think about the work, how they go meta. So I'm an accreditor, and I go on a site visit, or I go on a virtual visit, and I get evidence that they're online. And I go in and look at this online learning, and it starts to look like list or skill-based stuff. And you don't see the intentional looping of any standard. When you ask the question, what standards are anchoring this? When you ask the question, what instructional practices are anchoring this? If they can't articulate it, to me, that's the first push of Larry's prompt. Like, that's not quality in any way. In fact, it's dangerous malpractice, because what you're doing is potentially alienating the students, and they will go shopping with their feet, and they don't want that experience anymore, nor does their family, right? So here's the tension in the dual enrollment game, and Trina referenced this. Trina knows that Western Governors University and National University are clients of ours. And both are thinking very cleverly about skills plus, meaning if you're going to offer a skill, make sure that it's scaffolded around a set of experiences that also shows your range in a conceptual project or a conceptual application of that project. Now, they are both for-profit companies, so let's be clear. They're trying to decide. The old days was we could spend $100 on procedure, everybody took it, they got online, whatever. What they're trying to figure out is if we spend 140 and we unbundle these supports in clever ways, will people come to us more because it's flexible, it's on demand, they start to get a playlist of skills, then they can exit career or college ready. I think it's important for everybody to understand from an accreditation standpoint that skills-based learning is the bottom of the floor. Like when we go in and look at this, whether it's face-to-face pedagogy or online pedagogy, have they moved to this deeper understanding? And what's the evidence of that? Because if they're reading the standards, they would see evidences of that and they would see examples, right? And so I think it's a great push by Larry because it's like, you guys are the gatekeepers on that feedback for what standards have you anchored this to? How has it affected your pedagogy? How has it affected your assessment strategy? And what's the experience like for young people? Because I was on it for 30 minutes and it was terrible, right? It wasn't a great experience for me. So how are you rethinking those opportunities? And just as it's true in the face-to-face that kids don't need to sit for 90 minutes, in an online version, think about your experiences online. We've already got neuroscience from Netflix that if it's longer than 23 minutes, you ain't watching it. So let's make sure in that 20 minutes that it's super powerful and pragmatic.
Any feedback, any thoughts? I'm going to say, sorry, go ahead.
If I may, just to piggyback on what Bryan said, one of the things that was frustrating in St. Tom's with teachers is that there's a kind of a point of production where, you know, standards-based instruction and so on, the daily third grade schedule having I can statements. Well, how do you I noticed that there's a skill involved in taking, let's say, standards and translating them or moving those to the learning goal or learning target level, and then building instruction or lessons around that. And some of that is canned by, you know, curriculum companies, but much of it is not. And I think that's an area that, you know, at least based on my limited experiences with a small faculty in an online context, but I think that would be a great service to equip educators at the point of instruction with that ability to look at standards and be able to sort of weave those into learning targets and I can statements and at class activities and so on. Because I think there's a gap right now, you know, sample size 1. But Bryan, do you think there's some substance there?
I do. So in the chat, Trina had asked me to go into this a little bit later, and I can certainly come back at another time, but I've dropped a link and some examples of what we're talking about. So let's say that you take standard B1 here from, you know, NSQ, and you say the online teacher uses digital pedagogical tools that support communication, productivity, collaboration, analysis, etc. Now that's a lot of items in a series, elements of that standard. So let's just take out analysis and look at a simple tool to do an analysis in our pedagogical design. I'm a big, like, essential, important, and nice to know guy. Like, let's just start this fall in our communities of practice or this spring in our PLCs by making sure that we can attack 3 standards and talk about them, and that we can bring evidence of teacher learning around those standards or student learning and show those examples to others, have them sit in virtual classes to observe it. But if you all went on an accreditation visit and you just looked at some of those standards that I dropped in, you probably saw them throughout my deck, right? Like how I was being intentional around the assessment strategies, the tools, how I was thinking about the learner interaction, and what we were going to motivate students with their own self-assessment and pursuit, or how we were going to think about accessibility or some of the other standards. So I think giving them that candy store approach, Stephen, of like, hey, here's a standard. Here's how it walks all the way through. Here's Professor Trina, who's going to show you her best example this week. We're in and out in 30 minutes, but it's the cadence of keeping that going. And here's another tip. If you can't have a PLC, there's a great tool that I'm using all the time with my staff because they're all over the country. What we will do is we'll record a short, like Loom video where we just walk through a standard for 5 minutes. We explain it. And then the expectation is that by the end of the week, everybody's looked at the standard and they've submitted to a Google Doc an example of what they do. That's a very short and pithy way for people to check in. So as an accreditor, I might have conversations with people like, what's your PLC community of practice culture, your network improvement culture around standards? Well, what do you mean? When we have PLCs, we talk about the Gatorade machine and the forks in the cafeteria. Well, that's not enough. You got to be talking about student work. You got to be talking about standards.
Thanks. That's good.
Yeah, so I'm going to say at this point, it's been a great 2 days, and the feedback that I've received from everybody has been wonderful. And thank you for staying with us and doing this. Absolutely information overload from the topics we looked at yesterday, the topics that we've looked at today. All of the speakers just have not only decades of experience and years of working with all of these things. So I think the next step up is we will start now scheduling. First of all of these workshops and conversations will go into a like an online class with the modules, and any of the slide decks, any of the resources, everything else that we've captured will all go in for you to go back. You can either use this information with your teams, you can go back with your heads, or just use it for your own, as part of your own information.
It's like Trina's frozen. Let me jump in. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just a programming note that Bryan Setzer will be one of our speakers at our January meeting in Orlando. He will be there to join us. And so if you've enjoyed this session, come and join us in Orlando. Bryan will be there in person.
Larry, and I will say that I also spoke to Roger last night. He's actually open to coming over from England because a couple of the others asked us for more time with him. So he will, and I thank him for taking on that expense and everything else, but he's open to coming to be available and a resource and to do some more work with you. So I'm throwing you onto the bus there, Roger. Hope you don't change your mind. But
Clay and I talked
yesterday,
about that. Clay and I talked about that last night. That would be wonderful, Roger. Thank you very much. We'll also have an Emmy award-winning marketing person that will be there, and Nick Reed. So it'll be a good session coming up in January.
My guess is it will be long.
Well, we've got so much to do, and we want to be, NCPSA. Clay, you told me that my goal this year in taking over as chair of the commission is make sure we continue to provide all of this training and all of these things.
Exactly.
So I need as much feedback as possible to continue to bring these kinds of quality resources. I mean, guys, the speakers have been fabulous. I thank you very much for giving of your time. I know there's a lot of work goes into even preparing these and being high level. Each one of these modules, then we will begin to fill out and give you a lot more detail, a lot more time with the speakers. But this was just a high level to kind of think about, what do you need to be aware of? And I know it's overwhelming, it's too much, right? What do you need to be aware of in each of those 8 categories as you begin to launch and your schools begin to launch online programs? I think the next step is looking at how do we support the heads and the directors of technology? How do we get to them? How do we brainstorm with you on supporting those schools and those needs so that we're not constantly coming back, right? And trying to go one school at a time. There are ways for us to do this. You know, maybe it's an all heads workshop, maybe it's an all IT directors, whatever it is. I'm going to take that feedback from you and you know, just move from there. But looking forward to January and hope everybody has a fabulous Christmas break. And I will see all of you in January, if not sooner. You will get the email. Clay, I'll get Larry and I'll get that information. I'll get that to Larry and
Right.
you about all the resources and stuff, and we'll at least get that first one out. So
Fantastic.
um,
We may have to
thanks,
slot more
everybody.
time for meetings like this.
well, you know, as we learn, we grow, right? So thanks so much, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you all so
Bye
much.
all.
Stay on, please.
Yeah.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks.